I'd like to introduce this month's session, which is your mind and your money and how they affect each other. And I think, one of the things I've been reflecting on over the past sort of 5 sessions is that we spend a lot of time kind of talking a little bit about what you should do, or do this, or we suggest that, or we recommend that. And obviously, I think, one of the things with the changing economic environment is that actually, all of us need to take more care of our mental health than normal, be more aware of kind of our state of mind. And so actually looking at the link between mind and mental health, and the fact that actually sometimes it's easier said than done. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce myself. So I'm Ben West, for those that haven't joined previous sessions. I work here at London Mutual to develop our products and services, as helping to promote them in the wider world through activities like this. But I'm really excited actually to introduce a special guest this month, which is Dr Sallyanne Decker, who's Associate Professor of Banking and Finance at the University of Greenwich. One of Sallyanne's areas of interest is the intersection between money and psychology, and how that impacts on financial decision making. And she's also been, it has to be said, a great friend and supporter of London Mutual for many years. So really excited to welcome her to join us today and to run today's session. So Dr. Sallyanne Decker, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that really warm introduction. I'm really delighted to be here, and I've had considerable experience in the field of banking and finance as a banker and educator, and working with credit unions. The first credit union I worked with was London Mutual, so it's a particular privilege for me to take part in this Money Gym session today. And today's topic is going to be about, as Ben has said, mind and money. And we'll be covering a few areas which I think would be of interest to you. We're going to look at actually 3 main areas. So the session will be divided into 3 main parts. In the first instance, we're going to look at how we make sense of our mindset and what that means for us as individuals, so our personal money story. We're all different and we all relate to money differently. And we will look at how we can understand our own beliefs and our attitudes towards money. In the second instance, we'll look at common biases and how they affect our financial decisions. Every day we make multiple financial decisions, and we want these decisions to have a good impact on our financial situation. But we don't always make those decisions which are going to bring us the maximum benefit. And so what we're going to try to do is to see where we can encounter some pitfalls, which would mean that we don't always make the best financial decisions. And thirdly, we look at ways in which we can address some of these. So what we can do to improve our money mindset, and what we can also do so that we can commit to our financial goals and be able to address some of those pitfalls which we can encounter. And that will be followed by some time for questions and answers. So I hope we'll really enjoy the session.
The Q&A is always a highlight, so we're going to aim to make sure there's lots of time to cover all those at the end, because I'm sure there will be lots of really interesting conversations to be had with Sallyanne. So, Sallyanne, what do we mean by mindset?
Well, there's so many things which affect our financial situation. So we can see here, it's affected by how much income we have, or how much wealth we have, by our demographics, our age, our gender, what we know about finance as well, and what you've been telling people about, what good financial practice is all about in some of your sessions. So what we mean by mindset is that part of what affects our finance that we maybe do not always think about readily. The mindset is a set of beliefs and attitudes that we have around money. And these beliefs and attitudes, what we believe and what we think about money, these shape how we see ourselves, and it also shapes how we see the world. So our worldview about money. But we're all not always fully aware of these beliefs and attitudes. And a lot of these are actually formed when we're quite young. Research that has been done by the University of Cambridge shows that by the age of 7, we've actually already formed our money habits. So that's quite young, when we're not even earning any money by that time. But we pick up cues from, our parents and significant adults who are around us. And you tend to find that some of these beliefs and mindsets pass on from one generation to another. And of course, because we have different people who are influencing us, we can also have conflicting minds, views and beliefs. So for example, say you had two parents, one was a bit, sensible with money, and the other one was somebody who spent a lot. You might, feel that, well, spending is fun and that's what it's about, whereas not spending is kind of mean, for example. So you develop different kinds of beliefs and cues from quite early on in childhood. Other things which affect your mindset can be cultural. So people can come from different cultures. So for example, you might come from a culture where saving is highly prized. So it's important for people to save, and people have high levels of savings. So for example, like in Japan, we know that there are high levels of savings there. But you might also come from a very consumption focused kind of culture where it's spend, and that really affects you. Also social pressures, what's going on around you in the environment, these affect you as well. So quite a number of things tend to shape these beliefs which we have around money, and that's what we refer to as our mindset.
I see. So it's interesting because I think, obviously, in day to day here at the credit union, we have lots of conversations with members, and they'll say things like, I don't know why I always manage to, I don't know why I'm struggling to get into the habit of saving, or, I seem to sort of, struggle with debt and things like that. And so understanding, I guess, is it fair to say that mindset is sort of something which can kind of influence some of those habits and why we do the things that we do, even though sometimes we don't know why?
Yes, of course. That could influence why we might not be able to save. We might think, for example, that we equate savings with accumulating wealth, and we might think that rich people are bad people. Maybe we've had an experience in childhood where maybe we're bullied by a rich kid in school. So we make those associations and between wealth, accumulating wealth, and money, and it can affect us in our own lives. So there's other things like that which really can play. Some of these beliefs can really affect us, or sometimes we might just be overconfident about how well we're able to control ourselves, and we do not take steps to maybe commit to those savings. So that these are the things which we can also look at when we look at biases.
That's really interesting, and I can see already by understanding kind of our mindset a little bit more, it might make it easy to sort of ditch some of the bad habits and perhaps adopt some of the good ones. So in terms of sort of how do we figure out what our mindset is, and how do we sort of get that sort of understanding of ourselves?
Okay, so we will kind of look at how we figuring out your mindset really is something which is not something you can do in 2 minutes. It takes time. You really have to reflect on yourself and think about how you behave. And it's something that's really important to do. And it's really important to do because our mindset affects how we feel. So that connection between our mindset and how we feel is really important. And then that also influences how we act in any situation. So maybe one of the things which you could be doing is just sort of reflecting on, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling angry about this? Why am I feeling sad about this? And you can start reflecting on where those feelings are coming from, the thoughts which are behind those feelings. So it's really important that we recognize that money is very emotional. It brings up very strong emotions because it's something that's very important in our lives. And some of the emotions which are really often associated with money are things like being afraid, feeling insecure, or feeling guilty, maybe because we feel that we've spent too much, or shame, especially with debt. People feel shame around issues relating to debt. And there's also issues of comparison, where we might feel envious of the people next door, and we might want to have the same things, regret and anger. So these are all key emotions which are attached to money, or which we associate with money. So being aware of some of these emotions could be a lead-in to how we come to look at our mindset. So it's really important for us to understand the thinking and emotions which affect us. Sometimes you spend, and after you finish spending, you regret. So where does that regret come from? Does it mean that the spending was not something that it's against something, it's against your future goals, but why are you doing it now? So it's really important that we really are in touch with the feelings which we have around money, and they can give us clues about what's important to us, what we value, what our values are. Do we value maybe family relationships? And because we value family relationships, we're spending in a particular way. Also, what we're afraid of. Normally, we're afraid of things that we're going to lose. So, and that sort of derives some of our spending. And it helps us to also think about what we need and what we want. And these emotions can also affect how we take risks, for example. They can push you to things like gambling, for example, because you just feel a bit desperate. So it's the mindset really plays has a lot to do with many of the actions which we take, but we're not conscious of them. We just think that we're just doing things.
Interesting. And obviously, as regular viewers of the Money Gym Masterclass know, I'm always keen to sort of try and make it as practical and as kind of as hands-on as for our viewers as possible. So if someone says this sounds really interesting, these are things I need to think about. What are some of the kind of, do you have any kind of practical tips about sort of how someone might go about kind of having this kind of doing this sort of self-analysis? I mean, should they just sort of go for a long walk, or or do we need to sort of sit in the Zen garden and sort of go a little bit sort of Star Wars and Jedi on it, or what would be a sort of a good way to perhaps sort of open up this conversation with yourself?
Okay, that's a really good point, because that just leads into what I was going to cover next, which is going to look at one method that people use to actually, sort of understand their mindset and to figure out what are some of the traits which they might be exhibiting as part of their mindset.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So here we're just going to look at just one way which researchers have come up with to look at ways of classifying these attitudes or of thinking of our mindset. And what they have done, they've come up with something which they refer to as money scripts. So there are 4 money scripts, and you can identify which money script you have or some of your traits by taking a quiz. So there is a quiz. We've put a link to the website where you can go and take the quiz. But by answering a set of questions, these will be able to actually give you an idea of what some of the traits are. But this is just one method I must emphasize. There are other ways in which these mindsets have been classified. So there are other resources which are available, but this is just one of them. Okay, and so with this one, the kinds of mindsets are divided into 4, and these are called money scripts. So there are 4 money scripts: money worship, money status, money vigilance, and money avoidance. So with money worship, this has to do with people who believe that if they had more money, they would be happier. So in this case, money is associated with happiness, and it's associated with the person's security. Okay, and they believe that money solves all problems. Whatever problem they have, that the solution is that they need more money. Okay, and with this kind of mindset, you would find that these are people who normally work really very hard. They're diligent, committed people, because they believe that more work means more money, for example. So you would find that there are people who work hard. But you might also find that there are people who might spend a lot for to make people happy, to make their friends and family happy, for example, because of that connection that's made between money and safety, money and happiness, and money and power. So these are the things which money worship really involves. It doesn't mean that it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think all of us who work really hard have a bit of money worship going on, That's because of what we think that money can do for us.
It's important there not to fall into the trap of thinking that money is going to solve all the problems in your life. I see the point there. Definitely.
Yes, definitely. And not to spend just because you think it's going to buy you happiness, because that could lead you into some kind of debt problems, and which you might avoid dealing with. Yeah. And then you have the second kind of script, which is money status. Now, this is different from the first one, because in the first one, we're thinking about your own internal happiness. But with money status, you are spending to display to others. So it's for outward display. And that's because you believe that, this outward display is what is important, and people see you and admire you because of this outward display. So these are people who equate their self-worth with what they have, what they can show with their net worth. So that can really be a kind of flashy kind of spending, for example. Okay, and then we have another one, which is money vigilance. And what we find with money vigilance, these would be people who are very diligent, who have their budgets on time, have spreadsheets, have spending plans, have everything all planned, all worked out, pay everything on time. They're watchful, they're alert, they're concerned about their finances. So this is something which we all admire and which we all aspire to, but it's not perfect. So each of them has, you know, a negative and a positive side. But what you might find is with all this diligence, these people might also tend to be quite anxious about money.
That's what I was going to ask about. Yeah.
Yes. So high levels of anxiety and also quite secretive about money, you know, not trusting people with money. So they do not discuss money matters. So you might be in a relationship with somebody and they're quite secretive and about what's going on with their money because of this. So, but what you might have, because they have some kind of distrust, you know, but there would be people who might not use credit cards indiscriminately. If they use them, they would pay the bill of monthly, that kind of thing. And then finally, we have money avoidance, where we just put our head in the sand and we avoid dealing with money issues. And the reason why this happens, because, you know, because people, they give in to feelings of fear which they might have around money, or disgust because they think they associate money with something that is not nice. So they give in to a lot of negative feelings and anxiety which they associate with money by hiding away from all of these problems. So there could be people who think, oh, wealthy people are greedy. I'm not like that. Money corrupts people. Money is no good. So it's better off not to have anything to do with too much money. Or they give away a lot of their money so they don't have it. So these are the four types of money scripts. And if you take the quiz, it has about 32 questions in it. Then you'd be able to, they would send you back by email a report about what your own traits are, and it's free. So that's why it's a good one to try out.
And one of the ones I was going to ask about actually, Sallyanne, is, so do most people kind of fall into one of these four categories, or are most people kind of a combination of them?
No. People don't fall into one of these categories. Like I said earlier, you have many influences in your life. So you could actually have more than one of these influences in you. You know, that's very you know, you might be, for example, somebody who believes you have to work hard and because that is the way to go, and you know, it's the way to happiness. But you might also be quite vigilant because of your training and your background, this makes you vigilant. But you can also be somebody who works hard, worships money, but you also avoid dealing with money issues.
Interesting, and I can certainly sort of I certainly recognize the money avoidance one. I think, you know, we've all been in a situation where perhaps we're getting a little bit close to the end of the month, and, you know, avoiding looking at our bank balances, and obviously by avoiding it, you just get more anxious about it. So no, that's one I definitely recognize. But I think there are, as you say, there are elements of all four which I'm sure we've all sort of all recognized in our own behaviors.
Yes, definitely. And you will be able to find out what is more dominant for you. So you would have some which are dominant and some which are not as strong in you, but you could have elements of all of them in you.
Really interesting. And the and the link to if you're interested in doing that quiz is www.moneyscripts.com, but we'll be sure to include that in the kind of the email that goes around after the end of the session. Now Sallyanne, I'm obviously kind of aware of the time, and I want to make sure that there's lots of time for people to ask questions and things. So if it's all right, I'm going to move us on to talking about the kind of the next area, which is perhaps looking at some of the decision-making process and how our financial biases, and you're going to explain what that means in a second, how they can influence our decision making. So what do we mean by financial biases?
Okay, so I mean, we all need to make decisions. So what a bias does is it skews, it changes the way in which you would make a decision. So you would not make a decision in a rational way. And what we mean by rational here is that you make a decision in a way that would maximize your interest, a decision that is in your best interests. But if we make a decision that would not be in your best interest, then your decision making is kind of biased. So that's what these biases are. And often we all make financial decisions which are not in our own best interest in the long term. So these biases are things which affect our decision making, and they exist because we are human. It doesn't mean that it's because you're stupid or you don't know about finance. Everybody is influenced by these financial biases just by virtue of the fact that you're a human being and your brain just works in a particular way. Because you're a human being, because we're affected by emotions, and emotions can really affect the way in which we make decisions. So some of these biases are due to the fact that we make them and we're affected by emotions, such as we're afraid of losing something. And when we're afraid of losing, we make particular kinds of decisions. That could be like an emotional bias. And some could also just be of this, a kind of way in which we make faulty reasoning. So we might overestimate something, for example, or we might underestimate something, and then that would be some kind of a faulty reason. If you're hungry, you overestimate how much food you need, for example, and you end up buying more food. So that's just something which can be to do with faulty reasoning.
And I think, the reason the reason we're interested in talking about this particular topic today is that obviously by understanding those biases that might be affecting your decision making, it helps you to better understand your own decisions, and potentially to think more carefully about them or to change them. And I think, that's, biases we don't necessarily always have control over, but I think by being aware of them, that gives us more opportunities to change them. So Sallyanne, you had some kind of specific examples of that
Yeah.
you wanted to talk
about.
So
I've chosen some biases to talk about, and these are biases which are really linked to spending. So I've just chosen a selection because there are hundreds of biases which affect us. So I've just chosen a few. So I've chosen 5 of them for us to look at. The first one is what we refer to as present bias. And that is something which we might not think about this often, but most of our buying decisions, we're making a trade-off between what we do now and the future. So it's like if we spend now, it means there's less saving in the future, for example, but we don't often make that connection. So for most times when you want immediate satisfaction, you could be affected by present bias. When you buy things that you might not need, you buy them on impulse because it satisfies you now, but it might not necessarily be in line with your long-term goals. So that's what present bias is about. It's about immediate satisfaction, preferring immediate satisfaction over everything else. And what can happen is that we might get into debt just to satisfy this need now. We might use a credit card to buy something which is really an expensive, very expensive form of borrowing, rather than if we had planned properly to buy it, then we might, even if we have to borrow to buy something, we might do so cheaper. So present bias is about preferring to satisfy ourselves now rather than wait for the future. So, and it's also, we can procrastinate. So you have a task to do and you think it's a slightly unpleasant, like checking your statements. You might not do it because for now it feels unpleasant, although in the long run, it might be something that is good for you. Okay. So the next bias, which I'll talk about, is something which we refer to as projection bias. And that's a bit like what I mentioned earlier about when you feel hungry, you overestimate how much food you need.
they say,
so projection bias.
No, sorry, I was saying they always say don't go to the supermarket when you're feeling hungry, right?
Yes, exactly. Don't go to the supermarket when you're feeling hungry. So projection bias, it leads to kind of overconsumption. And that is because we think the way we feel now is the way we're going to continue feeling in the future. Okay, so we think it's not going to change. Our feelings and what is important to us now is going to continue being important to us in the future. And I think there was something we've spoken about before about going on holiday, Ben, about the choices.
Yeah, that was it. It came up last month when we were talking about the holidays. I think it was either myself or I think Monica who was on, who was talking about, at the airport, there are so many opportunities to buy things while you're waiting around at the airport. You turn up 2 hours early. So many many opportunities to buy things, shops and restaurants and all the rest of it. And there's a risk that by the time your flight gets to your destination, you've already blown your holiday budget, and you'll be sitting there on a much nicer beach somewhere, thinking, well, if only I could afford to spend a little bit more here. And of course, you've spent your budget on an extra coffee at the airport. So I thought when we were practicing for this, that seems a pretty good example of that.
Yeah, and that's the excitement which you have at the beginning of the holiday. That's super excitement. It's really making you make those decisions which you think are going to be important. And it's like a bit like gym memberships. You know how we all get the gym membership, we go for 1 month and then we never go again, and we've paid for the year. So that's because we think that the way we feel in January is how we're going to feel for the rest of the year. So that's projection bias. And you need to think about that money which is gone, and maybe you need to cancel that gym membership now because you're never going to go. Okay, and then we have what we refer to as a framing bias. And framing bias, this affects us when we're trying to evaluate a product and think whether we should buy it or not. And it's really about how information is presented to us. The way in which information is presented to us affects how we react to a product and make a decision, for example. For example, when we go to the supermarket, we normally look at the headline prices and we look at what we think might be cheaper or not. But what we really should be doing is what's the cost per 100 grams. So if you look at that, which is normally in small print, very small print, what's the cost per 100 grams, then you're going to be able to make a comparison about, what really is cheaper and what is not cheaper. So that's what the framing bias is. And that can affect us in lots of different ways when we're even borrowing money, for example, making that decision about the cost, interest rate or monthly payments in cash, for example. So what is emphasized to us can often be what is not important in that decision-making process. And we make a decision based on that. So that's what the framing bias is.
And it's fair to say, I think that shops are really good at this sometimes. So, for example, if you sort of buy a coffee or go to McDonald's or whatever, they'll always be saying to so would you like a large or a regular one? And obviously, of course, you've gone there only planning, so you're thinking you only really want a regular coffee, and suddenly someone's put the idea of a large one in your head. And I think, maybe a large one would be nice, and they've got you. And so I think it's when you were talking about this, I think seeing how good shops are at doing this, it's once you're aware of it, it's easier to avoid.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. With persuasion and social influence, that's kind of a bit self-explanatory, but it's being influenced by a product because everybody's buying it, everybody has it. You don't know you don't consider whether it's suitable for you. So your decision is made based on popularity rather than whether it works for you, rather than on your individuality. And I think people get caught out a lot these days with these things like celebrity endorsements and the like. That's something that really affects people when it comes to making decisions. So the key is to think about whether this is actually meeting your own long-term goals. But you can easily see how that could affect somebody based on their mindsets as well. And finally, there's an interesting one here, which is loss aversion. And, it's about really when you want to think about making choices, or whether you should switch between one thing or another, because I think that's something which a lot of people are thinking about now. When, should I keep buying this brand or should I switch from one to another? And here is something which we can be affected by loss aversion, because we might think that what we already have is so much more superior than what is out there. And we don't want to switch, and we might end up losing as a result. I think we've all watched these programs where, presenters go to a family and they do a swap of all their foods. And would you change this or would you not change that? And people think, I'm going to stick to this even though it's much more expensive because I prefer the taste or because it's my normal brand, for example. And they're not really willing to change. And one of the reasons why they might not be willing to change is because they feel they're going to lose something. So that fear of loss might mean you're not making a decision which is working towards your goal. Okay, and another thing is that we all buy expensive insurance just for the extra peace of mind. And a good example here is home insurance, for example. I had a home insurance product that the price just kept escalating till it was £58 a month. And I thought, I don't have 600 plus pounds of repairs in my house a year. So why am I having this expensive product just for peace of mind? So that's loss aversion, which is keeping me with that, which keeps you with those kinds of products. So if you think about those things, then maybe you would be able to make a decision which is more in line with what you want to achieve.
So it's helping yourself to understand why you're making decisions the way you're making decisions. That's really interesting. And so just before we sort of start on the questions, I think we were going to sort of summarize a little bit by talking about some of the strategies that we can use to change our money mindset. So we focused a lot on kind of understanding, being more aware of it, but so some actual kind of some strategies which perhaps people can take with them, I think would be really useful at this stage, Sallyanne.
So it's important to be more self-aware. Change your mindset. We've mentioned that. Be more self-aware. Know who you are, and there are different ways you can go about it. Do a quiz. Try to find out some insights. Ask people, and also think about the negative and positive sides of your own behaviors around money. But you could also try to keep a log of your feelings and thoughts. So what you could do is you think of a situation, a particular behavior. For example, you think of like, oh, I mean, I have debt, and the feeling which is associated to that. Think of the feeling as well. I feel shame, I feel anger, and then you think of what script you're running. Maybe the script is, I work hard, I shouldn't have debt. Maybe that's what you think. I work hard, I shouldn't have that. I am deprived. I can't have what I want because of this debt. So you have a script which you attach to that. And then what you need to do is to try to reframe that. Okay, so if you're thinking that the debt is depriving you, you need to say, well, what did I really achieve because of the debt? Maybe you use this money to actually invest in something. So don't forget that. What did I do with the money? And then what you feel is you're being deprived of. Maybe you think you're being deprived of a holiday. You can think, well, I need a holiday to relax, but what else can I do to relax that I can afford? So you don't have that angst and that negative feeling, which is not good for your mental health, just riding on your shoulders because of the debt. So it's about identifying the situation, then what feelings do you attach to that situation? And then thinking, what are the thoughts behind the feeling? And then you reframe what you can do about it. What can you do about it in the future, for example? So that's an example of how you can actually practice future mindedness, thinking of what else can I do in the future to deal with that. So I mean,
sorry, Sallyanne, you were saying?
I thought you wanted to ask a question, Ben.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Okay, so that's something which you can do for debt, or maybe if you feel you're spending too much, you also think, well, how do I feel about the fact that I'm spending too much, and you don't want to make a budget? Maybe you feel tense whenever you think about it. There is a lot of tension and anger in you, and you again think, well, why am I feeling tense? Why am I feeling this way? Maybe you might have to say no to somebody if they ask you for something, and you feel tense because of that. Then think, okay, so how can you reframe that? You can think about, okay, if I have a saving plan, if I spend less and do plan to save, then maybe I can retire comfortably in the future. So you actually sort of try to link this to your future and do something about that. Yeah.
Great. And so now I think we were going to chat a little bit about some practical, and I think this is what would be quite interesting to our to our viewers today, particularly interesting in terms of kind of some actual tools which perhaps they can take on. And I know you've got some suggestions around mechanisms you can use to reduce that stress and save. So yeah, Sallyanne.
So, I mean, the thing about biases is that they tend to derail us. So we don't achieve our goals because we made that decision which takes us in another direction. So we need to find ways in which we can commit to our goals, whether they're spending goals or saving goals or credit goals. So what we think about, there is a gap between what we want to do and what we do. So there's a gap between our intention and our action. We want to close that gap. One of the things which you could do is like apply the pay yourself first principle. So when you get your money or maybe your salary, your income, for example, instead of saying I'm going to pay all bills first and then save whatever you want to save first and then pay bills. Even if you do have debt, but by saving a small amount, putting something aside to reward yourself for your work, then what you're doing is that you are actually thinking about the future, that there is a future, this can change. So you are actually paying yourself first to make that connection with the future. There is a reason to save, no matter what your situation is at the moment. No matter what, you can save a small amount. The other thing about we can do is to actually slow down your decision making. We have a lot of things that are speeding up our decision making these days, contactless cards, we have the apps on our phones which you can use to spend. So a lot of things which speed up our decision making. So we act on impulses and the present bias really kicks in, for example. What you can do is that you can slow this down. And there are different things you can do to slow that down. You could have a decision-making rule to say, okay, I won't buy on the first visit to a shop, I'll come back. Or something else which you can do is you can put your credit card, if you spend with a credit card, put your credit card in a bowl of water and actually freeze that. Put it in a freezer, it's frozen in that bowl of water. So you can't use it indiscriminately. If you need to use your credit card, you would have thought about it and you have to actually get it out to fall. So that actually takes some time. So that actually is another thing which you can do to slow down your spending. So it's important to find ways to make your spending, your decision making slower. Lots of things also which you can do, which can help you keep on track with your goals and reduce your stress. You can save for a specific purpose. For example, with the credit union has a Christmas account, you can use that where you can say, I'm going to delay my spending now. I'm going to save my money in a Christmas account for holiday at Christmas, a 2-week holiday at Christmas, and you have a specific reason which you're putting that money aside for. So that can help you to be committed and the money doesn't get swept up by other things, for example. Another thing we can do is you can practice sweeping when you've paid all your bills and you have your disposable income, you've paid your bills, you've saved, you have disposable income, extra money, for example. Don't just keep them in the account which has the contactless and which you can spend readily. You can sweep all of that out and put into another account. And what helps here is if you know how much your essential spending is for the month. You need to have that figure in your head. You might not have the breakdown of everything, but have a figure that all my essential spending is X amount. That means everything else you can actually sweep is discretionary. You have to think about how you spend everything else. But if it's just readily available for you, you might not be able to have that control over that. And set some limits on different types of spending, depending on, for example, depending on your culture. For example, my culture, occasionally you have huge weddings which require a lot of spending. You need to anticipate these things which are part of your life and be prepared for them and set limits as to how much you're going to spend. So the key is to recognize that this is my life, it's part of my life, it's important, but I'm not going to let it be uncontrolled. Okay, so you can do that. And then consider using an arrangement, a tool called Lockbox. It's a product which helps you to save, but you can build your credit score at the same time. So you sign a contract with the company, that's Lockbox, the company, you can look them up. And then you can determine how much you want to save and say how much you want to save that for. But as you make the regular savings, this is recorded with the credit reference agency. So it shows a commitment to repayment, and that helps to build your credit score. I know that the credit union will be talking about credit history, so that's something which I think will be picked up there. And finally, talk to people, get somebody who will act as your accountability partner and discuss with them. Somebody who is completely different to you, who you can check with is this a good decision? Should I buy this? And then you have that sort of feedback, not just listening to yourself all the time. Okay. Right. So can you hear me, Ben? Yeah, and that, so that's what are the key messages for today? We are all really different people, and we should embrace that difference. But we should also learn to make that work for us. What we should try to learn what money means to us as individuals, and that's really about us, our personalities, our histories. And when we know what that means, we've identified what our stumbling blocks could be, we use this knowledge we have to plan for our future. At the end, our decisions and actions have to be a balance between living in the present and planning for the future. So there has to be alignment. That's alignment within the present and your planning for the future. And so, what you really need to try to do is to be as specific as you can about your future. I know the credit union has had something where they spoke about goals. Be realistic, be as specific as you can about your future and the future self that you would want to be. And the key to that is really being future minded in your orientation. Don't just get bogged down about what's happening today. Be future minded and use that to remain grounded and to be able to achieve your goals.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting, Sallyanne. And I think one of the themes which I found really interesting over today's session and what you've talked us through is kind of that real importance of kind of being aware, being mindful of your own unconscious biases and decision making, and really by being aware of those things, it's really kind of a useful tool to make better decisions. So we're at the stage in today's session, which I know is always a popular one, where we're going to take some questions from our attendees. So if you do have a question for Sallyanne, pop your message into the chat box. I will pick some out and read them out as they come in, and we'll do our best to cover as many as possible. As always, if your question relates to something which is kind of specific or personal to you, then do email us on feedback@creditunion.co.uk, and a member of our team will be able to help you with that. And then I think the standard thing which I always say every week is that we obviously what we're providing here, and the purpose of these sessions is to provide general financial guidance. And so if you are unsure about what's right for you or a personal decision relating to your own finances, we'd always advise you to kind of seek individual, personalized, qualified advice from a suitable qualified person. So without further ado, we'll open up and see what questions we've got today. So one question here, very practical one here. Are we going to get the slides? Well, I can answer that one, which is that yes, the recording of this session, including Sallyanne's kind of commentary and the whole session itself, will be appearing on YouTube, and we usually manage to get that up within sort of 24 hours of the session taking place. So the link to that will be sent around afterwards. Did anybody else have any questions about the kind of what Sallyanne's kind of spoken to us about today, or reflections or ideas on how it might relate to yourself? I think we might have blown people away a little bit here. Sallyanne, there was obviously a lot to digest on those slides and a lot to cover. Question from Sean here. What percentage of your pay do you suggest paying to yourself? Sallyanne, any kind of rules of thumb on what percentage of your pay you should pay?
No, there are no rules of thumb about what percentage of your pay you would pay for to yourself. I mean, but I depending on how much people earn, for example, if you can manage 10%, that would be good, but not everybody is able to afford 10%. So what I would say is, try to just save whatever you can. It's not the amount, it's the habit. It's just the act of putting that money aside regularly, which is going to influence you, because it says, I'm planning for my future. If you say, for example, you start with £20 and you see that you can afford 25, then change the amount to 25. You know, it doesn't have to be something which is going to derail you or stress you, but it has to be that act of putting money aside regularly, making sure that there is a future, which is what I want to have, a happy future. I think
That's a
that's the
really good
idea.
point there about actually the kind of the regularity of saving matters more than the amount. You know, it's better to save a very small amount and to do it for you know, without stopping for a long period of time. I think, you know, often people make the mistake of perhaps being a little bit too ambitious in how much they're saving. Then they find they're short and that they have to dip into those savings more than they'd like to. So I think it's better to start small and to grow from there. Certainly is the experience of us at the credit union. I've got another question here, Sallyanne. The questioner would like to show the pyramid we showed earlier, because they've got a question based on that. So I'm just going to put that up on the screen, and let's see if was it Kieran? Do you have a question about this pyramid? It's up on screen. So while Kieran's perhaps typing their question, I'll come up with another one. So Denise has a question on whether any advice on how to stay on course with any of these changes. Sometimes people say that maintaining a savings habit or sticking to a budget, and that's their problem, is maintaining that habit. So Sallyanne, any more sort of tips around helping people to stay on course with making changes that they make around their money?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you need to think about what are the reasons that are making it hard for you to stay. So we know that maybe you think it's hard for you to stay because it feels unpleasant. You know, you feel as if you're depriving yourself in some way when you are actually making that change. You know, I definitely feel like that's about the gym, because I feel as if I'm being deprived. So it really keeps me back. So what I really try to do is to think about, why am I doing it? And that's the importance of being future minded. So it's really about conditioning your own mind. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a completely smooth ride. There is going to be, you might have periods where you falter, but you come back on course. So it's about just reminding yourself that I must have a good retirement, for example. I must have a good future. I work hard, and this is what I deserve in the future. So these things would help to keep you on track.
Brilliant. And that question from Kieran around the pyramid. Kieran says, the pyramid shows the mindset at the top. I'm sure it helps to hear this points to the mindset, whatever stage someone's at in control. However, are there certain things we should be doing before we address mindset? I think they are referring to they're referring to the fact that obviously mindset's at the top. Does that mean that there are other things that we need to tackle first?
No, the reason why we put that's a really good question, Kieran. The reason why we put mindset at the top is to say that it's normally the last thing we think about. What we normally think about at the base, fundamentally, we think about how much money we have. You know, we think about our income and our wealth, and maybe that might be affected by gender issues, or as our age changes, that might change. And then we try to acquire financial knowledge to know about money, to know about, financial terms. But having that financial knowledge and your wealth alone is not going to get you to where you want to go necessarily. And then we develop proper practices, financial management practices like the budgeting and stuff. But still, you might have all of those in place, but the mindset might still be missing. So although, if you look at your mindset, you might be the last thing that you think about. It's just to say that the mind, your thoughts, really control your actions at the end of the day. And your financial situation boils down to your actions.
Fantastic. I've got a question here from Degna. Other than leading by example, how do you influence someone else's mindset? One of my children is great at saving. The other one, who's now an adult, spends every penny she earns or is given. So obviously we've talked a lot about what influencing your own mindset. What about other people's?
Right. So how do you influence other people's mindset? This is a really interesting question. And it's not so easy, because normally we do not want to talk about money. We think that it's a taboo to talk about money. So if you're able to have a conversation with your child about what their future plans, for example. Don't say let's talk about money, talk about their future plans, for example. Then you might lead into, so how are you going to achieve those plans? And that could give you a lead into a conversation about money and about financial habits. So I would suggest that it's really thinking about what is it that you want to achieve, by what time in the future. Just talk to them about what their specific goals, for example, are. And then you might also give them some reading material on money as a gift, as a present, for example. And that is something else which you can also consider.
Fantastic. It sounds like that in itself might be a good topic for a completely different session. I think that your presentation today, Sallyanne, has opened up all sorts of questions, certainly in my mind, and other topics that we might be able to explore. One more question. I think we can just about squeeze this last one in. From your personal perspective, Sallyanne, did you have a particular moment when your mindset changed?
Yes, I did. Sometimes it's something which happens in your personal life, something which yeah, I did. I mean, I've been thinking about my mindset and how I relate to money for many years, and making small changes. But I could say that when I experienced a bereavement in my family, that really led me to understand that I was no longer a child, that I really needed to handle things differently and to look at life differently. So for some people, it's something like that, like as something major happens and you feel exposed and you feel like, I have to reconsider my life. So for me, that was what happened. But it does not have to be that way, because you just think about what it is that you want to achieve, where you want to be, because we all want to achieve something, we all want to grow, we all want to progress, and that you can use that as a way to start changing.
I think that's thank you for sharing that, Sallyanne. I think that's a great place to end today's session and to wrap things up. I'd just like to just end by thanking Sallyanne once again for her sort of time, both in attending today's session and for her work in helping us to put it together, and for all of the content of her presentation today. I thought that was fantastically interesting and really useful, and I hope that for a future session, Sallyanne might consider coming back perhaps at a future session. But in the meantime, thank you very much again, Sallyanne, for that.